Greetings folks and welcome to the Electromaker Show. We took a week off because once again I was a bit sick, but we are going to make up for it this week with a full show of projects, new products and things on funding websites. And of course, the mystery box competition. So, let's get started. Hey folks, Futurian here. There is a lot of background noise in this episode that I'm afraid I could do nothing about. They are cutting down seemingly everything in the neighborhood that is living outside using power tools. So hopefully that doesn't distract you too much. Up first today, a project from the Maker Man YouTube channel. Now I was sent this sliding screen project this week, and at first glance I saw, well, this looks like a trade show and this looks like a professional installation that you'd find at a trade show just using stock parts that are maybe consumer or industry grade, which isn't the kind of thing that we'd usually cover on the show, but this is not what it seems. I mean, it is beautiful and interactive, and as you can see, it is fantastic. But what I mean is, this looks like industry grade stuff, and it was actually made, well, let me show you. Later in the same video, you see the materials that we used to make this build, and the design is amazing. This is Maker on a large scale. This is, dare I say it, skookum. But yeah, this thing has been cobbled together from what look like bits of old train track, perhaps, or maybe that's just old normal steel beam. Metalwork is not my strong point. But the point is that when you think about what you just saw at the start and then what this looks like now, this is an incredible build. And the DIY design choices continue by using a purpose-built set of runners, or at least modifying a set of runners to work in this environment for the screen to move along smoothly. And as you can see, it's pretty smooth. So they're using a belt to drive this back and forth. And I'm assuming that by doing it this way, by virtue of the fact that the belt, despite being rubber, having teeth, it means that they'll be able to be very precise with the positioning of the screen, but without actually putting any unnecessary stress on things. And this whole thing is being powered, by the way, by a pretty chunky stepper motor. Rounding it all off is a stepper motor driver and an Arduino, and of course a computer for running the interactive touchscreen. I've already spent a little bit more time on this one segment than I wanted to, but as you can probably tell from my voice, I'm kind of amazed by this thing. I think this is just a beautiful build, and I was kind of shocked, having seen the finished product, that it has such a humble origin. But then again, I guess everything does when it's in its prototyping stage. But then again, that's why we do this, isn't it? Ultimately, we're interested in microcontrollers and making fun stuff, but really we want to go from this to something like this. Though admittedly, almost all of my projects end up looking like the first of those two things for the entirety of their lifetime. And now onto a project called No Escape Sanitizer on the Electromaker.io website. This made by Ashoker, I hope I didn't completely destroy that. This project is a variation on one of the many hand sanitizer projects we have seen since the beginning of the pandemic. But this one has quite an interesting difference. So this prototype version they have made uses a Thunderbolt Sense 2 board, which is a Bluetooth Low Energy microcontroller board, and a magnet, along with the magnet sensor, which is built into the board, and a level sensor. Now, the idea being that you have to use the hand sanitizer to trigger the board. But the big question is, what will the board be triggering? And the answer to that question is the door. That's right, if you don't use hand sanitizer, you can't get out. Or in, I suppose, but either way, that's the idea. So the door side of it uses a servo on this prototype, although of course a full-size door, you could just use a normal door locking solenoid, and it uses the NRF52 development kit from Nordic Semiconductor. So we have the Thunderbolt Sense 2 board, which communicates with the NRF52 development kit, which will tell the server to open the door. And there's also a level sensor for checking if there is actually some hand sanitizer left in the bottle. So as well as giving a fairly full write-up of this project, saying all of the use cases it could have, and there was of course this video that I have showed down below, which goes through some detail as to how it works. There's also quite a nice point on here, which is as well as the project itself that's been developed here using just whatever tools the maker had to hand, there is a sort of design idea here that could be an actual printed version of this, which is a nice thought. Again, this is something that I certainly do not do enough of when I come up with something that I've just made at home, is think, how could this actually be made into a commercial product, even if it was never going to be? If I just wanted to make it compact and make it nice, how would I do it? And this is what Ashcore has done. If you're interested in either of the development kits used in this, by the way, Ashcore does link to them from his Electromaker article. So this is the NRF development kit he was using. This is the Thunderboard Sense to Sensor to Cloud Advanced IoT kit that presumably he was also using. But I will simply link the No Escape Sanitizer project in the description of this video. And now a post on the Raspberry Pi subreddit titled simply, The Teacher's Favorite Book. Now, there's a couple of things I really like about this. First is the use of the Raspberry Pi Zero, which I think is somewhat overlooked as a retro gaming machine. In the last show, we featured a controller which had a Raspberry Pi Zero in it. One of the things that came back to me is someone asked me, well, wouldn't that just not be good enough for retro gaming? And that's absolutely not true. You can play a massive variety of NES, SNES. I've even seen N64 games running on a Pi Zero, but that took some clever magic things that I don't understand. But again, this is just a nice use of that to make it all fit into the space. Because as you can see here, the thing is so thin that the controller fits in, the Raspberry Pi Zero fits in, and when the book is closed, it really does look like a normal book. And of course, there is the other components in there, a small speaker and a power adapter, along with, of course, the screen. But yeah, this is great. This is lovely. This is a little bit different from your average retro gaming thing. We've had a retro gaming controller inside a melon, and now we have a retro gaming system inside a book. I would love to see what comes next. Up next is a project from the open source subreddit, and it's one of those things that you think, why didn't I think of this? Because it is an open sourced mouse. Now, I'm sure some of you may have just thought, well, why would you bother? You can get a mouse for a couple of dollars. They work perfectly well. But think about it. A mouse is actually quite a complex little device. It is sending signals to your computer over and over and over again about position, about movement from the bottom of the mouse. So you need a way of tracking the floor, essentially. So presumably it's using a laser, like most normal mice do these days. Maybe not. Maybe it's using a ball. Like some of you, I'm sure, will remember the old days when you'd have to take the ball out of your mouse and spend ages getting all the grime and hair out of it. I spent most of my childhood doing that. And then, yeah, you have to think about the buttons. You have to think about the fact that it has to be a USB HID compliant device, which gives you a smaller variety of microcontrollers you can use. And then, of course, you have to program it to work smoothly. This is great. This is a really nice idea. And, of course, the fact that the body is 3D printed helps as well. Now, as cool as this proof of concept is, it was cross-posted from the rploopy subreddit, which is an interesting name for a company/collective or whatever. But these are the guys that put out the open source Trackball mouse. Now, I'm quite a fan of Trackball mice. I use them on my laptop because I've been using vertical mice and Trackball mice for quite a while, simply because I am one of the legions of computer people that suffer from repetitive strain injury in my wrist. And so open sourced ones I've always found kind of interesting. And as I said before, I cannot believe, as someone who talks about microcontrollers for a living, that I've never thought about trying to make my own mouse. I should probably address this now. If you are hearing the mad sounds of gardening happening outside of the window, there is literally nothing I can do about that. I was going to wait until they stopped, but this is Germany. They never stop. So back to the mouse. There's a couple of ways you can follow this if you are interested in it. User Crop Octagon mentioned in several posts that they will likely be making a kit for this. I did also notice that on the Ploopy website, they do already have a fully assembled mouse. Whether that is just the ones that they have been making that they are selling, or they're going to update this now with just the circuit board, or whether they're going to just make it, since it's open source, presumably they're just going to tell you exactly how they built it inside and out. I will let you know if that comes up and if I find out about it, because I feel like that's quite a nice project that a lot of us would resonate with and want to make ourselves. Up next on the ESP8266 subreddit. The title says, it seems trivial, but I'll never go caseless again. And absolutely, it does seem trivial, but you know what I've never had before? A case for a single one of my Node MCU boards. And I use these little ESP8266 equipped boards for almost everything these days. I recently have ripped apart the lights that I built for behind our sofa in the flat to upgrade them, because beforehand they used an Arduino Nano. They had a very clunky onboard way of turning the lights on and off. I just ended up saving a few settings and just forgetting about it, really. And I would like to update it so I can use an app to change the color and all this kind of stuff. And I will be using a Node MCU to do so, because essentially, in my opinion, if you're going to do something with an Arduino, why not connect it to the internet and control it from a distance? And these simple cases keep an ESP8266 safe. So I will link this in the description of the video, and in the comments just here you can see the GrabCAD site, which gives you the files to download and print yourself if you are a fan of these little Node MCU boards. Just a quick word of warning, before you do print this yourself at home, measure your Node MCU boards. I have bought several batches of these over the years, and I don't know why, because you'd think they just all use exactly the same measurements, but some of them have been slightly wider, some of them have been slightly longer. Yeah, just check. Just before moving on from the project section, I wanted to very briefly mention the contest happening on Electromaker.io. Briefly, because I already made a video about this on the main Electromaker channel, so please do go and watch that if this is something that interests you. However, Electromaker and Cypress are doing a contest called the Great PSOC6 Design Challenge, and they are giving away a bunch of really cool hardware for people who want to take part in the competition. I won't go over it all here. As I said, there's a video on it already, and I will leave a link to the contest page in the description. But I have, I have one of these things here. I've hardly had the time to start playing with it yet, but oh my, are these nice little boards. And as I've said in the past, I'm not someone who tries to pretend he has experience with people that he doesn't. I'm fairly new to the way Cypress's stuff works, and I'm pretty excited about getting stuck into working with these boards. So we'll definitely be coming back to it in a little more detail on the show in the coming weeks, and maybe I'll even make a separate video just about what I get up to with these. But for now, I wanted to quickly mention it because if you want to get potentially free hardware and potentially win $1,000, contest, electromaker.io, go. And once again, we find ourselves at the mystery box competition. Just briefly for the uninitiated, this is a box full of mystery items that have been sent to me to give to you. Now, some of them might be useless, although I can't think of one so far that's actually been useless. I was led to believe that perhaps there were some things in this box that were peripherals rather than microcontrollers. Hasn't happened so far. Anyway, what happens each week is I put my hand in the box like this, I pull something out like this, and I give it to one of you. Now, what do I have? What are you? You're from Microchip. Okay, this is nice. This is a little microcontroller from Microchip. I'll see if I can get it in focus for you just here. And these are based on a PIC chip, specifically the PIC 16F18855, which I believe is an 8-bit microcontroller. But I haven't messed with these myself. One of the only things I do know about them is that this is one of the ones where you would plug this into the USB port of your computer and you wouldn't need to install any software. It has a browser-based IDE, at least as I have been led to believe. There's also a bunch of pins on top for attaching things via SPI, and there's a PWM out there I noticed as well. And yeah, this seems like a nice, if unconventional to my eyes, microcontroller. But we have a prize now with, tactile buttons. Sorry, distraction. We need a prize winner. And the winner of this week's competition is Made What Now. And I didn't actually realise this until after we had picked the name at random and I went back to find a comment to put on the screen, as I always do, that this is the very same Made What Now who made the DIY air purifiers that we featured in our last show. But either way, we'll be in touch with you to find out how we can get this out to you. But for now, let's get on with the show. And now it is time to get back to funding website things. Oh, it's nice to be back. Now, Vizi is a device from Charmed Labs, who are the same people that brought those tiny Pixie cameras, PAXY. They're the computer vision cameras that work with robots. This time they have used a high quality camera and a Raspberry Pi 4 inside an enclosure for creating an AI camera, specifically to keep squirrels off your bird feeder. I'm not playing the video right now because this show is going to run long as it is, but it's a very cute Kickstarter video and I suggest you watch it. It's very well made. So the Kickstarter itself explains everything that you need to know about this in great detail. Given the viewership of this program, I'll just break it down quite simply. This uses a Raspberry Pi 4 inside the box, but that's not what's doing the AI processing. They have their own AI processing camera, which does at least take some of the grunt of the processing off it. Now, what I don't know is whether this is sort of a bit like a TPU, like you can plug a Google Coral Edge stick into a Raspberry Pi for it to do inferencing on neural networks. I don't know whether it works exactly like that, but given that there are modules that can even let you do certain levels of object recognition on an ESP82, this is probably going to be pretty quick. Another thing I really like about this is that it has this smart power and high current I/O here. And that's another really nice thing because it means that you could use this camera to power the servos that run the camera. I could have said that more clearly. What I mean is you could have the camera detecting objects and then send signals from that object detection to servos attached to the body of the camera and then follow things around like an automated security camera. And it helps that the 3D printed case that comes with it, or actually properly molded case it looks like, sorry, I apologize, looks very nice as well. Now, there's no shortage of AI-capable projects out there now. And of course, AI-capable development kits are absolutely everywhere. We'll be covering the new NVIDIA Jetson Nano in a moment. But this is very nice. This tells me everything I need to know about this project, that here you have a load of birds in your Google Photos account. Now, even if you don't use all of the features that this thing can give you, even if you don't plug servos into it, even if you don't really use anything, can you imagine how happy it would make a family member to put a camera in their garden that automatically snaps all the birds that land on their bird feeder and uploads it to a website that they can just access on a tablet or laptop or smartphone of their choice? I know for a fact that there are people even within my own family that would love this, and I think that alone is why this might be worth your attention. However, we are tinkerers, we are makers, and there is a lot more you can obviously do with this. I will let your imagination run wild, but I will leave a link to this Kickstarter in the description. It is a very well put together Kickstarter, and yeah, if the previous Pixie cameras are anything to go on, which were fantastic, then this is definitely worth your time. And now just quickly, 3 separate crowd supply projects that I think are worth a look at. The first is Swarm Drive by Nick Stick, and this is an ESP82 board which is designed for driving brushless motors. Now, brushless motors work a little bit differently to certain kinds of other motors. I'm not going to go into that now. It's kind of fascinating though. And the fact that this is an ESP32 board is very nice because it means, of course, you can you just get right into the weeds and program it using CMake and using the command line and using all of that good stuff, or you could just get the ESP32 boards for the Arduino IDE and program it that way. This is a very well thought out board, and as you can see from here, it is fully featured, and there is a website with a huge amount of documentation for how to get started, and of course the firmware for the board, and just what it is in general. They are $450 into a $2,500 goal on their funding journey, and if you would like to get a hold of the Swarm Drive, the early bird price is $50, and in my opinion, that is worth every dollar. Moving on to the YMFC flight controller and mini drone. Now this is a mini drone and a flight controller that is open source, and as far as I know, the circuit board is open source as well. And so you can fly it like a mini drone, but one of the things that this project is really interesting for is the comparison charts further down the screen. So as you can see, one of the things they're leaning quite heavily on is the fact that the lines of code required for the flight controller are much less than other off-the-shelf options. Of course, it says here that there's a difference. It's going to cost a little bit more as well, but this is definitely designed to be something to help you learn how these things work. And of course, this is from a much smaller distributor. So, oh, and I've just noticed this, I didn't see on my first pass, that they have tutorials on their YouTube channel for how to get it all set up, it looks like. That's cool. But yes, again, I want to fly through this, so if you are interested in this, I will leave a link to it in the description. There's 36 days left on this crowdfunding campaign, of which they are about a third of the way through, and if you would like to get your hands on one of these, they are $45. And our final crowd supply of the week. Are you one of the people who spends time on Home Lab looking at all of the amazing internet boxes and things that people, I don't do that. I don't really know. Not sure. Not much of a networking type. I have one box over there which does everything for me, and it's a Raspberry Pi. Oh, it's an Atomic Pi. I should shut up. The Traverse 1064 is an 8-core, 64-bit ARM64 networking platform. Now, I am not someone who knows a huge amount about this, but it does look like pretty much anything you would want to plug in to this you can, including SSD drives. You can use Wi-Fi, and I believe you can also plug in a SIM card to have it completely off the grid, as it were. Now, if this is the kind of thing that you are into, there will be a lot for you to read here, and you will be able to be a better judge than me as to whether this is something that should interest you. The things that I do know a little bit more about are small Linux computers, and yeah, this looks like a very powerful little box, and one of the things I like is that they are making a point of saying that if you are into low-level board hacking and you want to build this from software, from the ground up with your own software, you will be able to do. If you need some low-level debugging, you can use OpenOCD. Again, something I am not so familiar with, but I do know people who are somewhat into that. And I believe that it's a JTAG connector you can use for that. So you really, yep, you can debug the boot firmware via JTAG. So yeah, those who are already working on embedded hardware and are fairly familiar with debugging using JTAG, you can do that with this. This seems like the perfect hacker box for someone who wants to make their own home lab. And it's quite nice, actually, that the complete kit is $579, which to me seems like quite a lot, but to you may not. But they have other options here, like the DIY NAS kit, which is only $70, and they are selling the SSDs separately for $56. Presumably, if you get this, you get all of it. But yes, if this is the kind of thing that you like, if you want to make your own DIY networking box, this is something that you should have a look at. I thought it was worth mentioning on the show because we don't really cover DIY networking all that much, and it's something I'd like to learn a bit more about. If you are someone that has a home lab and thinks this is brilliant or rubbish, please tell me in the comments why I'm fantastic for putting this on the show or an idiot. And to round out the show this week, we're going to look at a couple of new products and a software update from Recalbox. But first, the NVIDIA Jetson Nano. Now, there is a new version of the Jetson Nano coming out. It's just been announced. It's very fresh as I am making this show. But what I do know about it is, as you can see here from this fantastic article by my colleague Mo Long, this version has 2 GB instead of 4, as I think the original did, but it only costs $59. Now, that is pretty big. So we're getting into the territory now where this is going to be, really butting heads with the Raspberry Pi. And yes, I know everybody says that. As soon as the board gets close to price of the Raspberry Pi, people will start talking like that. But realistically, that's still where we are with most consumer-grade SBCs. And the NVIDIA framework for working with machine learning and for working with specifically computer vision is fantastic. I have a Jetson Nano, which is downstairs at the minute, and as I said when I wrote about it some time ago, just getting up and running with the Jetson Nano is quite a weird experience because it can do a hell of a lot for such a small board without any additions. So just to quickly run over it here, as you can see, it has the 128-core NVIDIA Maxwell architecture-based GPU and a quad-core ARM A57. Now, for the processor. There's a lot to be happy about with this board. I'm going to be honest, I don't honestly know what difference having less RAM would make on computer vision projects, given that that's all offset onto the GPU. Because where Google and Intel, I believe, both use specially designed TPUs for doing edge processing, NVIDIA, of course, being the masters of graphics cards as they have been for many years, use their GPUs. So will it chug if you try to use it as a day-to-day thing? I mean, if you have this and something you want to use it as a web browsing device and you have several tabs open on Chromium, which is not allowed, then yeah, maybe it'll chug. But for $59, getting this level of AI-capable computer, which is easier to use and easier to get up and running with than the Google Coral dev board, because I have both and I've experience with both, yeah, it's damn good. I'm really happy that NVIDIA haven't just let this board die, given that they have the Xavier NX or whatever it's called, the bigger brother, which is way more powerful. This is great. I'll leave a link to this article in the description of the video if you want to see what Mo's written about it. And of course, we will be covering the board when it comes out. And now moving on to a new Rock Pi X SBC. Now, this isn't the first Intel SBC that Rock Pi have put out. And in fact, as it says in this very first paragraph of the CNX software article I am reading this from, it was $39 and making it one of the cheapest Windows 10 single board computers together with the Atomic Pi. And as it quite succinctly says here, the latter is not super convenient to use. I love my Atomic Pi, but it's very weird. And as I said in the write-up I did of it some time ago, the Atomic Pi was never meant to be a consumer SBC. It was meant to be the main board of a robot. I forget the name of the project now, but that project died and they sold off all of those boards. Hence we have cheap Atomic Pis. Anyway, that's a distraction. Now you can get a Rock Pi X SBC. It's a little bit more. It's $75, but there is a 4 GB version. And with 32 GB of eMMC flash storage, it's pretty, I don't want to say unique because there are so many different kinds of SBCs out there now. But given that most of them are running Linux and are trying to go toe-to-toe with the Raspberry Pi, and it's something that we talk about a lot, this is quite an interesting other option. So looking at this, you've got your Intel system on chip. It's the Intel Atom X5Z8 350 Cherry Trail. That is a quad-core processor running at 144, 1.44 gigahertz. That would be quite the SBC. And the system memory can be 1, 2, or 4 gigabytes of RAM. But this is the interesting thing. This is what I quite like. You have an option of 8, 16, 32, 64, or 128 gigabytes of eMMC flash memory. And onboard flash memory on these boards is something that I find quite compelling, especially if you can boot from it. But of course, there is also a micro SD card socket too. Add to that your normal I/O that you would get from a GPIO set of pins like you get on the Raspberry Pi, and of course connectivity via Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and it's a pretty compelling little board. As I have said many times, I've got a bit of a problem. I love collecting these boards, and a lot of them I have, and I love trying to cycle them and use different ones for different projects, but realistically, some of them really are just becoming part of a collection. This is one that I could see myself actually using, because having this set up with a screen somewhere means that anyone I know can use it, because most people I know who aren't familiar with Linux are very familiar with Windows 10. At the time of putting this out, this is in pre-order. When it's available for general sale, I will come back to it on the show, and knowing me, I'll probably be holding one at the time anyway. And finally on the show today, there has been an update to Recalbox. It has now hit Recalbox number 7.0 reloaded. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Recalbox, I would, in my own personal opinion, which is only my own personal opinion, say it is the easier alternative to RetroPie for retro gaming on the Raspberry Pi. I only say that as someone who's used both, and spinning up Recalbox seemed a little bit easier and less involved than RetroPie. Not that RetroPie is all that involved either, it's just an alternative. But it is a good alternative, and of course there's a huge amount of different systems that you can use on it for all of your retro gaming needs. But I'm not going to spend too long on this, because it has been far too long on this show since we've said I'm not going to talk about this, because ETA Prime has talked about it already and will go into all of the detail that you need. So I will link the Recalbox page in the description of this video, along with the video from ETA Prime, if you are interested in putting Recalbox on your Raspberry Pi. As far as I know, it works with the Raspberry Pi 4 now, and yeah, that's going to be a very powerful little gaming box indeed. That was our show for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another Electromaker Show, and if you would like to enter the mystery box competition, just leave a comment on this video. But for now, I hope you have a fantastic, creative and safe week. Take care.